But first, I do want to recognize Ms. Taylor-Dumpson as well. Obviously, what happened to you on campus is wrong, should not be tolerated, and is just disgusting. But we appreciate you overcoming that, and the fact that you're the student government president. Someday you're going to be sitting up here doing the same kind of hearing, and we look forward to those days in the future as well. But my guess is at American University, they probably had some diversity training. They probably had some bias training. So maybe this gets to the point Mr. Carolla made earlier. It's not all the bias training and diversity and these tests kids have to take now or students have to take now. Well, let me just go to Mr. Shapiro. Do you think this the bias training is something that is actually helpful?
I don't think it's effective. I think that, in fact, it tends to alienate a lot of the people who feel like, I'm not a racist, why am I being forced to endure the implication that I'm a racist and I have the necessity of undergoing bias training?
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that either Americans, their bias training is not any good, or it's just largely probably not.
People who tie nooses around bananas are not going to be dissuaded from doing so by bias training. They're garbage human beings.
To Mr. Carolla's point, right? It's a lot more about what kind of background and belief system they bring to the university.
I agree wholeheartedly. That starts at home. Anyone who's been in the corporate world knows you have to have sexual harassment training as well, and the cases of sexual harassment have probably gone up tenfold since the training began. So I don't see any direct line from training to effective application of it.
In fact, it could be almost the converse, right?
I feel it is,
yeah.
Yes.
But Mr. Carolla also talked about the positive impact of actually working together with a diverse group of people, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to bring people together in education and work and other contexts.
You know, and it's been my experience, some of the strongest advocates for left policy, and I always use the example, one of my good friends is Dennis Kucinich. And you cannot get farther apart than Jim Jordan and Dennis Kucinich. But we have respect. And a lot of times where we really work together is on civil liberty issues, these kind of issues. That's why I so appreciate this panel we have here today. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. So there was talk earlier about a speech code. Seems to me the speech code is the one that's right behind me, right? Isn't that the speech code in America, the First Amendment itself? Speech code and common sense, as Mr. Carolla has talked about. So, Mr. Shapiro, your thoughts on a speech code, or shouldn't it be the First Amendment? Shouldn't that be sufficient?
Absolutely, and I think that we're moving into very dangerous territory when we start identifying speech as violence. And that I think, is what's happening more and more often in our politics. I think it's happening on college campuses. When you start saying that what you say offends me to the point where I'm going to treat it as violence, then we are moments away from an actual violent conflagration, and that has to stop immediately.
Do you think, Mr. Shapiro, that some of the things we have seen from the federal government are contributing to what I would describe as crazy situation we see on many campuses, situations you've had to go through and live through? Do you think some of the things that the federal government has done are chilling free speech on college campuses? And specifically, and frankly, what prompted my renewed interest, or greater interest, I should say, in this series of hearings we're having on the First Amendment, was a few years ago when we discovered that an agency with the power and the ability to intimidate and impact people's lives, the agency known as the Internal Revenue Service, was systematically and for a sustained period of time targeting people for their political beliefs. Do you think that has some chilling impact on what may in fact be happening on what is in fact happening on our college campuses?
I mean, sure, when people have an enormous amount of power, whether it's at an administrative level or at the federal level, they tend to use it in ways that benefit the side that they control, and that has to. I mean, I think you've seen this. It's a completely different topic, but I think you've seen this in the context of how a lot of the sexual assault hearings are taking place on campus now, where they're taking place under Title IX auspices, and they don't actually follow any sort of constitutional due process procedures. That's an area where the federal government has gotten involved and really overridden individual rights. And listen, nobody is in favor of sexual assault. Everyone wants to see rapists prosecuted. But we need to come back to some sort of rational standard of application, not just what we wish we could do in some sort of utopia.
Just two final points. Mr. Raskin raised the point earlier that majority party invites 4 of the witnesses, the minority party invites 1. That's standard practice. I would point out of the 4 witnesses, I think probably 2 come from, 4 majority witnesses, probably 2 come from the left on the political spectrum. Mr. Shapiro hasn't exactly been a fan of the current administration, and I don't know exactly what Mr. Carolla's, I would think he's fairly libertarian, but I don't know if he's Republican or Democrat. So we tried to invite people who believe in the sign that's behind me. That's what we tried to do. And people who are willing to defend it, who are willing to say that this is paramount to the American experience and who we are as a nation. And that's what this series of hearings that we're undertaking in this committee are all about. So final question is to the heckler in the middle. When's the movie coming out again?
No Safe Spaces. Dennis Prager and myself have gotten together to do this subject, but the 86-minute version of it, not the 477-minute version. Yes, my bladder's very angry at you. Yeah, I think it's coming out mid-early 2018, so look forward to that.
Well, we look forward to it as well. I want to thank each of you for being here today and participating in this important hearing, and we look forward to having more. And frankly, what we're going to do, we may invite some of you back, but we certainly want to have some of the students, maybe even some of them who are in the room. A gentleman from Alabama, I'm sorry.